How's it going, everybody? I know it's been a little bit since I talked to you. I'll be honest with you. These current events have been driving me absolutely crazy. So today I'm going to get back at you guys with some flat earth discussion. You're going to have to give me a little bit as far as the video is concerned, simply due to the fact that my device that holds my phone while I'm driving broke on me the other day, and I've yet to replace it. So today I want to discuss the flat earth and something to do with perspective that I found very, very, very interesting, and I don't think anybody can overlook this fact, especially if they're trying to determine whether or not they live on a spherical earth or not. Now, let's think about the moon, for example, and if we take its size and reduce it by 2,000%. Now, the law of perspective says that all objects will work exactly the same based on the laws of perspective and distance and their relative size. So what I suggest people do, and I did this myself, is you take the moon and you reduce it in size by 2,000%. Now what happens when you do that is the moon becomes an object that is 1.8 inches in diameter, okay? Now you take that and you stick it on the wall, and you figure out how far away you would be if you were on Earth looking at that moon. You can use the same exact mathematics to do that. You take the distance of the moon, which is 238,000 miles, and you divide that by 2,000, and you come up with your distance after converting that into inches, correct? So you stand that distance away from your wall, and you take a picture of the 1.8 inch diameter moon, okay? Now you go outside, and you take a picture of the moon on a full moon event, during a full moon event, right? You take a picture of the moon, and you compare it to the picture of the moon that you had on the wall. Now, according to the law of perspective, those two objects should appear to be the same exact size when you look at them side by side if you use the same camera and the same magnification when you took the pictures. They should look identical. However, if you compare the picture that you took with the moon that you drew out at 1.8 inches and compare it to the actual moon that you went outside and took the picture of, the moon outside is about 10 to 12 times larger than it should be. In other words, it's 10 to 12 times larger than the picture that you took on your wall. Now, this should be 100% contradictory to how things are supposed to work if you're living in the reality NASA tells you that you are. So ultimately, what this means is, without a shadow, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the moon is either 10 to 12 times closer than they say it is, or it's a hell of a lot bigger than they say it is, or it's a combination of both. Now, you could do the same exact equation, apply it to the sun, and I'm almost positive that you're going to come out to the same exact results. Now, I want you to ask yourself, if these are the numbers that NASA are giving you to use, if these are their mathematics, why the hell does it not match up with the reality they tell us we live in? It's a simple question. And you don't even have to advocate flat Earth to look into this, my friends. Do you not want to know where $52 million a day is going? Even during this government shutdown, we have this work carrying on. And it's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. There's no way around it. And now you have President Trump going after NASA and asking them, why the hell can't I go to the moon? And it's a damn good question. See, I knew this was going to be President Trump's strategy from square one when he talked about going back into space and creating a space force and all of that. What does it do? What does it do? What does it do? What does Trump gain? Now, we all know that Trump can't go to space. And I'm pretty sure he's smart enough to realize that he can't go to space. So what does Trump have to gain from talking about a space force? Well, if you look at the strategies that Trump has taken with everything else, Trump is all about exposing stuff that's going on behind the scenes without really having to do the dirty work himself. What he does is he points to a problem and says, this is going on. And usually, take the wall for example. It's a lofty expectation. Like, very few people think that this can actually get done. But Trump, not only does he say he's going to do it, he actually goes out and tries to get it done. And the same thing's been happening with space. So with the wall, for example, you've had both parties for years and years and years talking about, let's do this border security. Trump comes along, plays the same tune, and nobody really made a big deal out of it until Trump decided to actually do something. And what happened? What happened when that happened? Everybody started going after Trump and completely reversed their stance on everything. Now, when it comes to going to space, why would he not use the same tactic? Now, he knew that they weren't going to build the border wall. He knew that they didn't want to, okay? Ultimately, I'm not too sure if Trump really cares too much as to whether or not that wall gets built, other than the fact that he's not going to get reelected if it does. There's other reasons why they're talking about that. However, when it comes to space, I'm pretty sure he's using the same exact strategy, okay? You tell everybody, we're going to go to space again because why the hell not? Now, I want you to ask yourself about technology, okay? If you've heard of Moore's Law, you know that technology grows exponentially in strength. Our computers will just keep continuing to get better and better and better and better and better and better and better, to a point where there's really no plateau when it comes to technology. So where else in history has anybody ever created a technology that hasn't gotten better at doing its job and cheaper as time goes on? There has never, ever been any technology created that was pushed mainstream that became more expensive to produce as time went on. That's not how things work. It goes against Moore's Law. So, let's apply this to NASA. NASA receives $52 million a day in funding. And not only that, they have vast resources that span the entire world, the most brilliant minds in every field that you can imagine. Esoteric information that you can't possibly hope to ever see because you're a civilian. Okay, gotta realize NASA imported a whole bunch of Nazis from Operation Paperclip and all of that other stuff. Where do you think our rocket technology came from? We didn't have any rockets before World War II, and then all of a sudden Wernher von Braun comes over and gives us all of his technological trade tricks, shows us how to build rockets that aerodynamically shouldn't work to begin with. And then he says in order for us to get to the moon, we would need 3 rockets the size of the Empire State. Not only that, we wouldn't be able to launch directly from the surface of the Earth. We would have to build a space station in space before going there, and then less than 30 years later, we're sitting on the fucking moon. I don't think so, my friends. And then if you look at what happened after we went to the moon, you want us to believe that we just destroyed all of our technology. Destroyed it and had to rely on the Russians to get us to space. Doesn't make any sense at all. It goes against Moore's Law. Not only that, it goes against national security. 100%. JFK more than likely didn't know that we couldn't go to the moon when he went out on stage and said, we're going there. Okay, I don't think he had any idea that the earth was flat. I don't think he knew. I think it's a need-to-know basis. Why does the president need to know? And I think Trump's playing the same game. Okay? By talking about Space Force and coming out and saying, I'm going to create another branch of the military that's going to go to space. You could do so with a plausible deniability. Okay? Now, as President of the United States, you're not going to be inclined to come out and tell the entire world that the earth is flat by just saying, hey, the earth is flat. It would create chaos, and you wouldn't want to be the one responsible for dropping that on everybody. However, if you look at soft disclosure and the way that people have done things in the past and the way that governments have operated in the past, the truth doesn't come out from the guy at the top. However, it doesn't come out without the guy at the top not wanting it to. So you create plausible deniability. Now, I don't think Trump gained the knowledge of the earth being flat from his position as president. He more than likely knew this before coming into office, especially if you look at Mike Pence and his views, as well as some of Donald Trump's close acquaintances and some of the stuff that they've been tied to, let alone his uncle obtaining all of Nikola Tesla's work. So, there's no way the Trump family doesn't have a superior understanding of how the electrical universe works. They literally had access to every single document Tesla ever made. So why the hell would somebody like Donald Trump be talking about going to space if his uncle has direct knowledge and esoteric information that we could only hope to know about when it comes to the realm we live in? Now, Nikola Tesla may not have come out and said it with straight conviction. However, if you look at his writings, it is undoubtedly obvious that he himself was a flat earth proponent. Now, he may not have described it as a flat earth. He talked about it as a realm. Everything for Nikola Tesla was energy, okay? Well, let's put this into perspective. Everything we see around us is energy. There's no doubting or denying that either. So he had to have been onto something there. And if you look at the way Tesla describes the universe and the way everything works, he talks about transistors and transformers, and more or less referring to the heavenly bodies as conduits for energy. The ley lines and everything else, if you look at them when they're projected over a flat earth, it lines up exactly with the flower of life. It draws out the pattern of the flower of life. How is that coincidental? That one of our most esoteric symbols that everybody knows, yet few people actually understand the true origin to, happens to become blatantly obvious when you take the ley line patterns of our Earth and you put them out over the azimuthal equidistant map. See, the thing about the heliocentric model that is driving me absolutely crazy trying to disprove it is that although it is very easy to disprove, trying to prove the flat Earth becomes astronomically difficult simply due to the fact that the mathematics are interchangeable for both systems. So how can I sit here and tell you that the Earth is flat if the mathematics I'm giving you work on a globe and vice versa? How can you tell me that the Earth is round because of two sticks placed in the ground when I can take your mathematics and apply it to a flat Earth? It's absolutely ridiculous. You can't use math to prove anything because it's just a language that describes the world around you. And like language, math can be used to describe absolutely anything. However, if you use your own observations in the texts of literature that have been given to you from your ancestors, which is more or less their account of history. People like to talk about how our ancestors didn't know what was going on and they were talking about mythology and legends, and these were just stories they told each other. What do you think our ancestors are going to do when they look at our fairy tale of a globe Earth? What are they going to do when they sit down and they start reading about how we believe the Earth was a rotating ball spinning through space with 7 different forces acting on it all at the same time? They're going to laugh at us. They're going to laugh at us because you know what? We turned our back on our ancestors. We turned our back on all of that knowledge that was given down to us based upon observation, based upon our own 2 eyes and our own senses. It wasn't until mathematics was introduced that things started getting convoluted, because it's language. You can't argue what your own 2 eyes tell you. You can't argue feeling something. You can't argue wind blowing against your face. You can't argue the fact that you're stuck to the ground unless you jump. You can't argue that everything is observably flat. You can't argue that there's no curvature. You can't argue against any of these points because your eyes tell you that this is true. The only way you could ever argue against any of the things I ever just stated is if you throw mathematics into the equation. And as soon as you do that, it's like talking to a drunk guy explaining to you how God came out of the sky and talked to him. Language can describe it, you can envision it, but it doesn't make it true. However, if you saw God come down from the sky and talk to that drunk person, you yourself would observably know that this happened. So why in the hell would you ever put your faith in the words of a man that's telling you about information you could never prove unless you use your own 2 observable eyes and go out and confirm it? Now, when it comes to the texts that we have from our ancestors, once you start taking them literally like they're supposed to be interpreted, and you start laying them out with the model that they believed, and you start using your own common sense, it becomes very apparent that these ancestors knew exactly what was going on. Okay? Now, if you look at the Bible, they tell you that the earth is to tell the time and the seasons. So in other words, the Bible is telling you that the earth is a giant clock. Okay? Now let's take this literally, because like I just said, our ancestors observed this as history, and they observed this as literal, infallible truth. So, the earth is a giant clock. Now we're going to assume that we were divinely inspired when it came to creating our own timepieces, because we use the natural world around us in order to inspire us to keep track of the time, okay? Now, if you look at the way that any watch or clock is constructed, there's a bunch of gears underneath the surface of this clock face, is there not? Now, what do you need in any gear system in order to make sure that it doesn't seize up and stop functioning? Well, you need oil, and you need an energy source. You need oil to lubricate the gears and mechanisms that are making this clock work, and you also need an energy source to make these hands move around the clock and make the gears turn, etc., etc. Now, if you look at Nikola Tesla, like I was talking about before, he directly correlates the sun and the moon as transistors that are picking up an energy source being carried through the ether. So think about it like this. We've all seen Tesla coils, right? We all know how lightning interacts with metal conduits, right? So if you go out into a thunderstorm and you stick a giant metal pole up into the air and there's lightning coming down, chances are that pole is going to conduct that lightning because it's a conduit for it. So what Tesla is describing is that the sun and the moon are deriving their energy from the field of electricity around them, referred to as the ether, okay? So, let's consider the sun and the moon the two hands of this clock, okay? And they rotate around us to give us the time and the seasons in a spiraling fashion back and forth between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, okay? Further away the sun is into the southern hemisphere, the colder it gets for the northern hemisphere, and vice versa. Now, I talked about a lubricant for these gears. Now, like I said, we're assuming that the way that we design our timepieces is almost identical to the way that our Creator designed the Earth. Now, let's think about the gear system for a second. What do we have to do to oil our bike chains? We have to put WD-40 on them, right? Same with a watch, we have to put a lubricant in the watch. And what happens to lubricant over time? Okay? It deteriorates, it becomes less viscous, it stops doing its job, okay? And it starts to congeal in certain places. It starts to correlate, it starts to move around the gears and amass in certain places, right? So what do you have to do? You have to go in, you have to clean that gunk out, and you have to put more lubricant back in. Now, let's start talking about tar sands in our natural environment, okay? Now, we have several major tar sand deposits in the world. Now, one of them is in British Columbia, another one is in Venezuela, and another one is in Russia. Now, there are smaller deposits all over the place, and basically what tar sands are is they are a mineral oil. And if you've ever been anywhere where there's tar sands, you can literally scrape it out of the sand, and you'll know what I'm talking about if you've ever felt mineral oil before. It's basically the same thing, but there's natural deposits in British Columbia, Venezuela, and Siberia, Russia. Now, let's take the face of our clock that we design, right? Take a watch, for example. Transpose that over the azimuthal equidistant map and draw red circles around where our natural tar sand deposits are worldwide. If you compare the areas of a watch where the gears overlap and where this oil accumulates over time that you have to clean out and replace, and you lay it over an azimuthal equidistant map and compare it to those red circles you just drew, you're going to find something very interesting. You're going to find that the same places these gears overlap in the watches that we design as humans transpose perfectly over the azimuthal equidistant map to where these tar sands are naturally accumulating everywhere. Now, what does this mean? This just lends more support to the fact that the Bible and other texts are telling us the truth when it comes to our system being nothing more than a timepiece. Now, let's take this one step further, okay? They also talk about a dome or a firmament in ancient texts that's over our head that separates the waters from the waters, okay? Now, what I find very, very interesting is that if you examine how everything is constructed underneath our feet, you come to realize that human beings have very, very, very little understanding about what's actually going on underneath our feet. Now, they like to tell us that there's the crust of our earth, and then the mantle, and then a layer of magma, and solid core of iron at the center of our earth. And they tell us that seismographs have proven this. However, we've never dug more than 7 miles or 11 or 12 kilometers underneath the surface. However, there was a gentleman who's older that was out in Oregon, and he was famous for using dowsing rods for finding water sources. Now, this older man, this gentleman, was up in Oregon, and he dug a well. And what most people don't realize is this well actually produced the water source for a river. We're talking hundreds and hundreds and thousands of gallons of water every minute being pushed up from underneath our feet, creating a river that was designed by a man who simply dug a well. So we have to realize that there is a vast amount of water underneath our feet that we do not realize is there. And on top of that, the powers that ought not be definitely do know that it's there. Now, it's no coincidence that this guy dug this well and all of a sudden he had interviews, right? He goes on radio shows talking about how he discovered that you can dig wells and create water sources. Now, you can go search this on the internet. It's pumping out hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per minute, created an entire river. Now, right after he did that, California started instituting laws where people were not allowed to dig wells. And then all of a sudden, a giant... I enjoy your breakdown and then keep up the good work. Can't stick around at work. No problem, man. I appreciate you watching my videos. And the interaction is what I do it for. I have all this knowledge sitting in my head, right? Or at least what I'd like to think is knowledge. It's no use for me not to be able to give it out. I appreciate you watching. Like I was saying, you have this river being created by this guy who was just digging a well looking for water using dowsing rods, right? And then California, the state below it, institutes no drilling, and on top of that, there is water shortage and scarcity everywhere. Now, that didn't happen by coincidence at all. If you look at California and how rich in agriculture it has the potential of being. Now, Northern California produces a shit ton of our vegetables, a shit ton of our food for consumption, a lot of our marijuana. Like, it's agriculturally really, really rich. Now, how is that possible if there's a water shortage? Think about this for a second, right? They want us to believe that there's very little water in that region. Well, I'm telling you right now that you don't have the way that the ecology and the way that everything is structured environmental wise in California doesn't make sense when you think about it in comparison to how much water is available. Okay, if you look at the way that the erosion happens, especially a lot of these events that are going on with these mudslides and everything, there's been sinkholes all over the place in California, and all of this was happening during drought conditions. Okay, you don't get a sinkhole without some sort of liquefaction, okay? There is vast amounts of water underneath California right now because the water that created the inland sea, there was an inland sea. There's no doubt about it. The fossil records are there. We have the evidence of it. The Great Salt Lake, all of that was underwater at one point. Where did that water go? Okay, where did that water go? Now, if this is a constructed system, it'd be very easy to get rid of that water and just, put it underneath the surface. Now, this also correlates to what happened when the Russians decided to go dig their deep borehole 12 miles down. 12 kilometers down, 8 miles, sorry. They ran into water at depths of like 6 miles underneath the surface of the earth. Where the hell is that water coming from? Now, this is all primary water, mind you. Like, it hasn't been contaminated by pollution or anything like this. It's very natural. It's the perfect alkaline acidity for your body. Like, this is the kind of stuff that you need in order to survive. And that's the reason that they don't want us tapping into this source. Okay? So, we've accounted for the waters below. We can prove that they are there. Now, I ran into a very interesting video the other night that basically showed the moon becoming eclipsed. However, it wasn't your normal video. This video almost looked as though a wave of water moved over the moon and blocked it out, eclipsing the moon. Now you can look up this video, just type in water eclipse of the moon on YouTube and it'll pop right up. Now this also correlates to Crow 777 and his videos that almost look as though there's a wave going over the moon and the moon is re-rendering. Now, I find this very interesting because the ripple effect that you get in those videos is almost identical to the effect that you would get if you took a plate and you submerged it under cloudy water slowly, like water that matches the density of our atmosphere as far as obstruction, is, particulates obstructing your view, right? It's almost identical, and on top of that, the rendering effect can be explained by the magnification of the water. So basically what happens is this wave comes over the moon, the craters slightly change position. It almost looks as though the craters were moved up a fraction of a degree or whatever. Now, if for some reason there's a difference in density, like let's say that the moon itself is being moved through water or a water-like substance, if you're moving something through water, you're going to create some sort of wake, okay? Whether you're underneath the water or above the water, you're creating some sort of wake. Now, if that wake were to come over the moon, the difference in density of that water would create a difference in magnification, which would perfectly explain why the craters appear to change position. So, there's another piece of evidence that points to there being water above our heads, and that is if you decide to go ahead and look at stars through telescopes, okay? Through a telescope that you yourself can control. Now, if you go ahead and look at, say, Venus, for example, it doesn't look anything like a spherical body at all, okay? It looks like a lens flare. It looks like a point of light in the distance, changing perspective, changing sizes. And not only that, but it doesn't look like it's coming through a normal atmosphere. It doesn't look like it's coming through empty space, okay? It looks as though you're taking a flashlight and you're on the other side of a swimming pool and you're pointing that flashlight at me. Now, the rippling in the water and the different density levels of the water are going to create a shimmering effect. It's going to change the position. It's going to distort that light, okay? So you get this effect underneath the water where it looks like you have different points of light coming out from different directions. Now, it's that light source underneath the water that I'm holding when I'm holding my torch or my flashlight if you're American. Does that signify to you a spherical object? Am I using a spherical object to project that light? No. That light is being projected from a flat face, okay? Now, that matches up perfectly with our observations of the planets above our head, okay? When you look at the planets through a telescope, you do not see a spherical body. The only time you see these magnificent pictures of Jupiter or Venus or Pluto, they're from NASA. Now, you yourself could never hope to render a picture of Jupiter through an amateur telescope like you see from NASA. So why are my observations completely different than those of NASA? And it boils down to this. It boils down to the fact that NASA knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that 99% of people don't care. They just don't care. Why? Why would they ever lie? They're counting on you not asking that question, okay? And not only that, they know damn well that when somebody like me comes out and tells you these obvious facts that you yourself have never seen, a three-dimensional body in the sky with your own two eyes that you can prove, They know that you're just going to say, well, NASA's taking pictures of it. This guy talking to me is absolutely crazy. Well, you know what? You can think that all you want, but you're only setting yourself up for failure. You're only setting yourself up to be deceived. Now, all of this was consented to by us in one way or another. Otherwise, they would have never been able to get away with it. They wouldn't have been allowed to. It goes against everything in our system. Okay, when they come out and they put a globe in every single classroom, and on the bottom of that globe it says not for educational purposes, there's an issue with that. Why would a globe not be meant for educational purposes? And if it's not meant for educational purposes, then why the hell is it in every classroom in America? And not only every classroom in America, every classroom all over the entire world, okay? Now, let's get to the biggest pushers of the globe, which was the Catholic Church. Now, the Catholic Church, just like NASA, should not be believed at all, okay? And I'm going to tell you why. It's because they're proven liars. It has been proven that they bastardized true Christianity and turned it into pagan sun worship. All of the holidays that you see around you are strictly designed to coincide with the heavenly bodies when they're positioned over a flat earth, okay? Because, like God said in the Bible, the earth was created for time and seasons. And now the reason that we're supposed to worship certain things on certain days is because our energy is connected to everything around us. And I've addressed this in another video. So the real Sabbath on the Jubilees and all of this stuff, there's a reason why we celebrate it on the days we celebrate it. It's because our energies are transferred to the heavenly bodies above our heads, okay? Now, what Christianity fell into when they allowed Catholicism to come in and create the vast empire that they did, they allowed the calendar to get bastardized and changed to the Gregorian calendar, changing all of our holidays, changing the dates of everything to coincide with pagan worship. Now, this comes into effect when you start thinking about holidays like Christmas and Easter and the Jubilees and Sabbath, and how we go to church on Sunday now instead of Saturday like we're supposed to. And it's because the heavenly bodies over our heads that are gaining the energy from us worshiping and praising and celebrating on these days are now being given to the wrong entities, the entities that the Catholic Church want to have power. And you wonder why everything around you goes to shit at certain times of the month, or why holidays don't give you what you want from them, okay? However, if you look at the people that are going back to the original Jewish calendar and they're celebrating Jubilees when they're supposed to, when they're observing the true Sabbath and all of this stuff, I've looked at their lives and the hardships that they have and compared them to the hardships that I have, and it just seems as though their energy is being put into something that's giving them more back than what I'm receiving. And I don't think that that has any coincidence when you start looking at how the Catholic Church bastardized the calendar. And that was just the first step. So they got us giving all of our energy to the wrong entities, which opens us up to be deceived even more. So what do they do next after that? They start sponsoring people like Galileo and Eratosthenes and all of these other people, right? And what does that do? That puts into the heads of the public, of Mr. Peasant out on the street starving and begging, that we live on a globe. Now, right now, you have to realize that their civilization wasn't like ours. They couldn't go directly to the Bible and read the Bible and see that God told them that the earth is flat in Genesis, because they didn't know how to read. And not only did they not know how to read, they weren't getting any information from their priests that was actual information from the Bible, because they did their masses in Latin. And very, very few people understood Latin. And so what would happen is, people would go to church, they would sit through an hour and a half, 2 hour sermon or freaking mass or whatever you want to call it, and they would listen to a language that they didn't understand. The priest wouldn't look at them, until I think it was 1900s at some point, the priest actually had his back turned to the congregation the entire service. So they were just sitting there observing a pagan ritual and giving their energy to it when they didn't understand anything that was going on, okay? And again, that sets you up for another delusion. So when the priests did communicate with them, it was what the priests wanted them to hear. It was their morals, it was their dogma, it was their religion. It wasn't from the Bible. It was their bastardized interpretation of a non-literal allegory. Okay, that's what they refer to the Bible as in Catholicism, as an allegory. However, if those people would have been able to read the Bible, they would have never fallen for Copernicus. They would have never fallen for Galileo, because we all know that the text tells us that we're living on flat, unmovable objects on four pillars that'll never move, with the sun and moon set above our heads for time and seasons. It's that simple. It's in plain Hebrew. Okay, can't argue it. So these people don't read the Bible. They don't talk to their priests. They go to mass that they don't understand. They're worshiping gods on holidays that aren't really Christian holidays at all. And like I said, this all feeds into Galileo and Copernicus and all of this being introduced into society. It primed everybody. Now, this all happened right at the time when all of a sudden we were starting to gain the ability. One second, I'm kind of stuck. Where we started gaining the ability to travel the oceans in a manner in which we were never able to before, right? Do you think it's any coincidence that Galileo and all of these guys came about in history right at the time where we were starting to discover new regions of the world and people were traveling all over the place via boat? Okay, and what would have happened if people would have kept thinking that the earth was flat? Okay, what would have happened? Real maps would have been drawn. They would have gone down into the southern hemisphere and realized that the reason they were off of their declination by 10 to 12 miles every day was because, hey, there's more land down here. Not only that, by telling everybody that the southern hemisphere was devoid of all land is the perfect ruse to keep people from going down there on top of it. Now, let's take into account the maps that existed at the time period I'm talking about. There are maps that depict Antarctica as a very lush, green, prosperous continent where there was life and vegetation and all of this everywhere, okay? And like I said, we can't turn our back on our ancestors. If they're drawing a map of Antarctica with 4 separate entrances that have 4 separate rivers coming out of it, leading to somewhere, we can't argue that that's what these people observed. Not only that, we do have accounts in journals of both the northern reaches of our plane and the southern reaches of our plane, both being very lush at one point in time. Now, we also can't neglect the accounts of people actually leaving the outer ring of our supposed flat Earth. There's accounts of people going down to Antarctica and looking for inlet rivers and inlet seas into the continent of Antarctica. And there was 1 or 2 people that actually managed to penetrate these regions. Now, a lot of people like to talk about global warming as a man-made creation, etc., etc., and they're trying to get us to alter the way we live in order to stop the world from warming up. Now, let's look at the accounts of our ancestors again, because that's the best way to understand history, is to take what they said literally and not put our own interpretation in on it. So there's been many ice ages before, and there's been many warm-ups before where the world increased in temperature and everything became tropical to a degree, etc., etc. Now, our scientific modern understanding, they want to tell us that this happened over millions and millions and millions of years. However, if you read ancient accounts, these periods tended to last about 20 to 30 years, and you can see several cycles of this happening. Most recently, back into the 1900s, the 1900s with the last mini ice age, where everything got really, really cold, and there wasn't really any summer in the northern hemisphere for almost 2 years. So let's just assume that these events actually happen because there's accounts of them happening. Do you find it to be coincidental that we can't go down to Antarctica right now, okay? And that all these ice sheets are melting off in sizes that we've never, ever seen before. And on top of that, the biggest one to ever break off of Antarctica's ice shelf just broke off a few months ago. Now, you know what was very interesting about that ice sheet that broke off? It was a perfect rectangle. It had 90-degree corners. It was a perfect rectangle, geometrically perfect. If there's one thing I've ever learned in science class that I can actually take to heart, is that nature itself does not build in straight lines without intelligent influence, okay? So you have the biggest ice sheet ever breaking off on Antarctica, okay? And then at the same time, it happens to be an exact geometric triangle to the point where the corners of it are precisely 90 degrees. Now, what did I just say? Nature does not build in straight lines. It has to have some sort of intelligent influence for you to observe that. With a logical mind observing that, that's what a logical mind is going to come to as its conclusion. So, what if this is nothing more than a natural cycle allowing us to gain access beyond the polar ice wall down in Antarctica? Now, let's take this to another place that I'm going to have to take it, because as much of a speculation as it may be, you can't help but to correlate what's going on. Now, everything happens to be warming up in Antarctica. We have rivers coming from places where we can't find the water source, etc., etc. Discoveries are being made every day. You have world leaders that have no reason to be in Antarctica going down there all the time, including the Pope, the Black Pope, going down there to visit whatever, okay? And now they're trying to keep all of us in the mind state that this is man-made, and on top of that, they're spraying chemicals all over our heads, which you can't deny are trying to keep the planet cooler, because what does all that barium and aluminum and all that shit in the atmosphere do? It reflects sunlight away from the surface of the Earth, inevitably meaning that it's not going to generate the same amount of heat that it would if it were to reach the Earth and have that thermal insulation from the Earth keeping it around, okay? So, what I'm telling you is, I think they are purposely trying to engineer our world around us in order to keep the planet cooler, as our Creator is trying to institute our natural cycle of access to the outside world. Now, I know for a fact that there's other continents beyond the ice pole, because ancient Chinese documents and maps have come out showing not only one outer layer, but two outer layers with about 15 to 20 extra continents. And not only that, these maps show us that they understood exactly how solar and lunar eclipses took place, and it was because of bodies like Rahu and Ketu. Now, this ties right back into Tesla. You have to have a diode, right? You have to have the opposite of a diode, okay? Basically what I'm saying is every action has an opposite and equal reaction. So if you have one fundamental piece to this system, i.e. the sun and the moon both need a counterpart in order to balance this energy out. Now, Tesla said that these objects had to exist in his writings. Now, does it seem coincidental that the ancient Chinese just so happen to have a map that completely correlates to Tesla's understanding of what was going on above our heads? Now, if you look at the eclipses and how they take place on our Earth, okay, there is no way in hell, according to the heliocentric model, that you can have an eclipse on our Earth with both the moon and the sun above the horizon of the observer's eye. So if the observer is standing on top of a building and he's observing the sun or the moon being eclipsed, both objects cannot be above the horizon at the same time. And not only that, you cannot have an eclipse where the moon is being eclipsed. Okay, the moon's being eclipsed from the perspective of the shadow starting at the top of the moon. However, the sun is behind you, rising. So why is the shadow coming from the top of the moon towards the bottom as the sun is rising behind you? That's impossible, yet it happens on our Earth all the time. Theme of this stream. They tell you that one of the bodies, whether it be Rahu or Ketu, are actually obstructing the sun or the moon when you see these eclipses. Now, this gets very, very interesting, because if you look at the way that the moon changes its phases throughout the course of the month, and you try to correlate that to the sun's positioning to the moon and the Earth's positioning to the moon, no matter how you cut it, you cannot account for this. This is because if you take a thermal camera and you film thermal footage of the moon during its phases, you run into something extremely odd. Now, you'd assume if you take a thermal camera and you point it at the moon, being a distance of 238,000 miles away, you should not be able to get a thermal reading from your FLIR device on your freaking iPhone. However, not only do you get a thermal reading of the visible portion of the moon, you get absolutely no reading at all as far as temperature is concerned from the covered portion of the moon. So say the moon is a half moon. If you take your thermal camera and point it at that moon, it's going to show you that the moon portion that's illuminated is giving off a temperature. However, the portion that is not illuminated does not exist. Think about this for a second. Your thermal camera does not recognize that there is an object that has heat at all. And I'm telling you, this picks up any object at all, whether it has heat or not, because it compares it to its surroundings. So the moon itself on the illuminated half should appear a yellow or a red, and the portion of the moon that's not illuminated in this camera should appear to be like a dark blue, dark purple. However, there's nothing there. There's no temperature at all. None. So not only does this camera pick up the temperature differences on an object that's 238,000 miles away, it's also telling you that whatever is covering the moon is also blocking all thermal signatures from being recognized. How is that possible? It's just supposed to be a shadow. It's a shadow covering our moon. You should be able to see a temperature difference between the illuminated side and the unilluminated side. However, you don't. There is no physical object on the other half of the moon that's not illuminated. It's not a physical object. It's just not. Logically speaking, after those observations, I cannot sit here and tell you that when I'm looking at a half moon, that I'm looking at a moon that's being obstructed by a shadow. No, I'm looking at an object that's literally lost half of its physical appearance, and there is nothing there to see. I'm just saying that makes absolutely no sense to me, especially if you think about the theory I was just mentioning, where you have either Rahu or Ketu covering that portion of the moon, right? You would think that you'd get a thermal reading from the other body, right? But you don't. You don't. So there's an anomaly there. There's an anomaly. I don't have the answers for you. All I'm telling you is that it doesn't add up on the heliocentric model. We have a way of explaining it on the flat earth model. However, I can't prove it. I just can't. However, like I said, our ancestors are telling us through very, very accurate maps. Mind you, This Chinese map shows all 6 continents that we're aware of on this map thousands of years before anybody supposedly traveled to North America, before we even knew Australia existed, before we knew about Antarctica, before we knew about any of this stuff. The Chinese are putting it into maps. So I'm not gonna discredit their information as far as our heavenly bodies are concerned and how they refer to Rahu and Ketu. So according to our ancestors, I'm definitely going to lean towards there being other objects above our head. And as far as Antarctica being the circle of the earth containing the waters that separate us from whatever lies beyond it, whether it be a dome or an infinite plane, I'm going to take Captain Cook's accounts on face value for what they are. So Captain Cook decided he was going to go down into the southern hemisphere and investigate Antarctica and circumnavigate it for the posterity of man and map and, journal coverage his journey, right? And what's very, very interesting is he was searching for a continent that everybody thought existed. However, he never found any evidence of it being there. But he searched and he searched and he searched and he searched for it. And what he ended up finding out is the further and further south he got, the more and more off of his reckoning he was. So in other words, he thought that he was traveling 20 nautical miles in one direction when you go into the southern hemisphere, right? Thought he was going east 20 miles. So when they actually figured out where they were according to the star charts and stuff, they actually traveled 12 to 16 miles less than they thought they did, sometimes as much as 27. So what does that mean to a stenographer, to somebody looking at the stars? The stars don't lie to you. Your eyes don't lie to you. What this means is there is more land down there than their map was telling them there was. So basically the longitude and latitude lines get distorted the further south you go. Now, this is explained 100% by the statistical data that he recorded as far as nautical mileage that he traveled. It took him 4 years to circumnavigate Antarctica, and he clocked over 60,000 nautical miles. 60,000 nautical miles to do this. Now, it should have only taken like 16. It took him 4 years. Okay, now let's fast forward to modern times. Do you know how long it takes to circumnavigate Antarctica right now? Right? Circumnavigate Antarctica, it takes about 180 days. Okay, or 80 days, sorry. Something like that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Numbers are irrelevant. Whether it's 80 or 180, we'll say it's 80, okay? We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. It takes them 80 days to circumnavigate Antarctica right now, okay? However, it's an indirect route, and on top of that, even with it being an indirect route, when you compare it to how long it takes to circumnavigate the equator, which should be shorter? Which should be shorter? It should take you less time to navigate Antarctica, does it not? Because it's a smaller body. Nope. If you look at the numbers, let's say it takes 80 days to circumnavigate Antarctica. It takes like 30 to circumnavigate the equator. So how the hell are you circumnavigating the equator quicker than you're circumnavigating Antarctica? It's absolutely impossible. Absolutely impossible. You should be able to circumnavigate Antarctica in the third of the time it takes you to circumnavigate the equator. However, it's complete opposite. It takes you 3 times longer to circumnavigate the equator than it does to circumnavigate Antarctica. 3 times shorter, sorry. It takes a third of the time to circumnavigate the equator. It doesn't make any sense. You should be able to circumnavigate the equator quicker than you shouldn't be able to circumnavigate the equator quicker than you circumnavigate Antarctica. You shouldn't be able to do it. You just shouldn't. Yet, time and time again, you have people that circumnavigate the equator quicker than those that circumnavigate Antarctica, and that's with an indirect route, okay? And Captain Cook's not the only person to go down there and circumnavigate Antarctica at distances that are frickin' above 40,000 miles, because the Queen Elizabeth went down there and did it too, okay? Now everybody's gonna tell me, oh, but they do a frickin' Antarctic circumnavigation race every year and it doesn't take them that long. They take an indirect route, okay? They don't actually circumnavigate Antarctica. What they do is they go from port to port around Antarctica without ever skirting its coast. They take an indirect route. They basically do a triangle around the continent. However, when you lay that out over a flat Earth map, all they're doing is traveling the ocean from one point to another. They're never anywhere near Antarctica. I also want to ask you, why the hell is it that I can't fly a plane within 100 miles of the Antarctic coast? It's against the law for me to do so. If I do so, I'm getting shot out of the air. Why the hell don't we have direct flights over the North Pole? Now, don't get me wrong. There are flights that skirt the North Pole. However, like I said, they never come anywhere near the North Pole. Never anywhere near it. They skirt around it, right? They do the same thing in the South, only it's to a much more obvious degree. Everybody says that they have flights that go over Antarctica. They have flights that go over the islands of Antarctica. They have flights that skirt the coast of Antarctica. They have flights that might go a little bit inland over Antarctica, but you never see a flight going over the South Pole. And not only that, just to get your plane within the 100 miles, you're never allowed to be more than 1,000 miles away from an airport when it comes to Antarctica, okay? So what does that mean? It means that they've designed laws that make it impossible for you to take a plane to the South Pole. You can't do it because you have to stay within 1,000 miles of an airport. It doesn't allow you to go very far. It doesn't allow you to go very far at all. Oh, but Alan, somebody that was rich could go out and take a could take a boat anywhere they wanted down there. Wrong. You're not allowed to have any heavy fuel on your boat once you get beyond 60 degrees in the southern hemisphere. You're not allowed to have any heavy fuel at all, okay? And so let's just say you can manage to develop a boat that travels on sails that can cut through the ice and withstand the weather, etc., 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 etc. You're not allowed to set foot on Antarctica without the express permission from every signing signatory of the Antarctic Treaty. Now let's just say you get beyond that. Let's just say you have the resources to get a boat down there. Let's just say you have the resources to get through all of the signatories signing on to you going down there for some sort of expedition. Now you have to pay for an ecological survey of the area you're going to be impeding, right? So now you have to pay for somebody to tell you exactly what your effect on the environment's going to be in that area. Now, how is that possible? Because nobody's ever been to the area you want to go to, right? So now you have to pay for them to go in to do the expedition before you, right? Let's just say that. They have to go in, they have to survey everything, they have to tell you what your ecological effect is going to be. You're not allowed to leave any debris of any kind behind. You have to leave the environment exactly how you found it. So, and mind you, there's not shit down there for you to use anyway. So now you have to bring a heat source, you have to bring all of that shit, you have to bring all the food that you need, you have to bring all the equipment that you need, you have to do all of that shit, all on your fucking own. And that's after you've paid millions and millions and millions of dollars for ecological surveys. But then you run into an even bigger problem. Because you know what? There's parts of Antarctica that are independent territories. So even if you get all of the signatories to sign on to it, now you have to weave your way in and out of certain territories that are owned by independent countries that may or may not let you on their property. And you don't even know exactly what that is because the maps aren't actually what's going on down there. They don't represent reality. So you're flying blind on top of it. Nobody's ever been where you're going. There's no maps at all. All you're doing is walking south, while at the same time weaving in and out of these territories that you're not allowed into. So let's just say by some miracle, you make it all the way out there and get the evidence that you want. Do you really think you're making it back? And that's just if everything goes fucking perfect and they actually let you down there. Then, you know, and you paid for all of this shit, which they're not going to let you do. They're just not. So anybody that tells me the Antarctic Treaty isn't standing in between me and exploring Antarctica, you haven't done your fucking research at all, because you would need at least $50 million before you even fucking bought your boat, before you even paid for your fucking crew. Sorry. You might make it to Antarctica, but you ain't making it back. Because I'll tell you right now, there's a few people that have gone down to Antarctica and have been turned away at gunpoint. It's documented. So, what possessed all of the economic powers during wartime to sign the most comprehensive treaty ever signed without any form of hesitation? And we're not even allowed to renegotiate this treaty until 2042. Now, mind you, this was all after Admiral Byrd came out and said that there's an area the size of freaking North America down there that's full of every possible resource you can imagine. What are they hiding? They're hiding something. You can't deny that. Captain Cook doesn't go down there and circumnavigate 60,000 miles because he doesn't know what he's doing. He was the best sailor of the time. All I want to do is get people to open their eyes to reality and understand that our ancestors were telling us the truth in their ancient texts. It's no coincidence that every civilization all over the entire face of our plane, up until the Catholic model came into existence, believed that the earth was flat. Think about it for a second. What has the Catholic Church ever given humanity other than war and slavery? What has science ever given you besides a disconnection from nature and the illusion of freedom? What man has never lied to you? Yet you're going to believe a man in lab coat preaching about mathematics you don't understand and take it on faith. At least with the Bible, I can verify everything I'm being told using common sense. However, if I pick up a physics book, I have to do at least 10 years of study to understand the mathematics. And once I understand the mathematics, even though they work, you're going to come to the realization that everything is based on a presumption. Nobody has ever measured the radius of the Earth. They used mathematics to assume the radius of the Earth and then applied that to all of their other mathematics. So basically what I'm telling you is their math may work, but it's based on a foundation of lies. And not only that, their math works, but not only does it work for the heliocentric model, you can transpose it over the flat Earth model and it works just as well. Let's take Stellarium for an example. It's a program that tells you about the stars above your head, right? It tells you the position, where they're going to be down to the second. You can go in, you can look up where the moon's going to be on this day, when I'm going to be able to see Jupiter and Venus and all this other stuff. And it's all heliocentric math. However, if you take that mathematics, right, from Stellarium, you invert it, because you have to invert it in order for it to transpose over the azimuthal equidistance map without it being in reverse. If you transpose it and lay that information over the azimuthal equidistant map, it lines up perfectly with flat Earth cosmology. And that is the problem with the heliocentric model, right there. is that you sit here and tell me that your mathematics prove that the earth is round. But if I take your mathematics that prove the earth is round, I can use those same exact numbers transposed over my model and prove that the earth is flat. So which one of us is right? Well, this is the crux of the baller's argument. My math is right. Well, your math works on the flat earth model. So now, math works for both of us. What do I have going for me that you as a baller don't have going for you? Well, my observations match a flat earth. My observations do not match a ball earth. And that right there is all anybody needs to do to come to the quick realization that they themselves are not living on a spinning ball. And with that, I bid you a good morning and farewell.